A young black man walks into the headquarters of a company his grandfather co-founded. But before he can even sit for the interview, he's turned away because of his dreadlocks. What they didn't know is that they just disrespected the bloodline that built their own company. Seattle, 7:42 a.m. Rain tapped softly against the glass skyline, like fingers strumming across a rooftop piano. The city was just waking up, but for Elijah Carter, the morning already felt heavy. He stood in front of Orion Tech's headquarters, 36 floors of mirrored glass stabbing into the gray sky, as if to prove that power always rises, and truth tends to get left behind on the ground. He wore a light blue button-down, well-fitted chinos, a minimalist backpack over one shoulder. His dreadlocks were neatly tied back, not a strand out of place. Nothing was sloppy. Everything was intentional. But Elijah knew better than to expect anyone to see that. Because what people saw first and often only was his brown skin and his hair. 32 job interviews in a single year. Not a single offer. Not because he lacked skill, his GitHub was stacked with top-rated repos, some with hundreds of forks. He'd built scalable back-end APIs, contributed to open-source AI tools. But every time, the first thing out of someone's mouth was, "You here for delivery? Internship? Are you lost?" This morning, he inhaled deeply and stepped through the revolving door. The chill of the steel met his palm, a cold reminder that once inside, they wouldn't know or wouldn't want to know who he really was. The first thing he saw was a marble reception desk and a row of chairs bathed in artificial light. The air smelled like expensive coffee and industrial-grade floor polish. In one corner, a massive LED screen looped Orion Tech's brand video. Shots of executives shaking hands, smiling engineers, and slogans like "innovation through inclusion" and "power through people." The irony was hard to miss. Elijah made his way to the front desk. The receptionist, white woman, early 30s, soft blonde curls, was typing something with the disinterest of someone on autopilot. When she looked up, her eyes skimmed his face, paused on his hair. Then came the question flat, without a smile. "Warehouse position, right?" Elijah didn't respond right away. Not because he was surprised, but because he'd heard it too many times to even flinch. Part of him wanted to say, "Yes, and I also own the building." But he swallowed it down. Instead, he kept his tone polite. "Number software engineering. I'm here for an interview with Dylan Hirsch at 8 a.m. She furrowed her brow, glanced back at her monitor, eyes still locked on him. Name? Elijah Carter. A pause. No nod. No thank you. No recognition. "Wait here," she said, picking up the desk phone and dialing an internal extension. She whispered something Elijah couldn't hear. So he stood. While he waited, a white man in a deep blue tailored suit strolled through the front doors. Instantly, the receptionist straightened up, her face reprogrammed into a wide, practiced smile. "Good morning, Mr. Jensen." "Hey, Allie," he replied, barely glancing at Elijah before disappearing into the VIP elevator bank. Elijah watched the exchange. Not the first time. And definitely not the last. He wasn't even mad. Just tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but the kind that builds in your bones when you've spent your whole life trying to prove your identity just to walk through a door. The receptionist hung up the phone. "All right. I'll print you a badge. Take a seat." A small white visitor pass slid out from the printer. She passed it to him through the glass panel. Elijah looked at the badge. No photo. No job title. Just the word "Visitor" in bold, black font. The badge was light enough to blow away with a sigh. But the eyes around him were heavy. He took a seat. The bench was cold. 2 chairs down, a white male employee glanced at Elijah from head to toe, then leaned toward his coworker and smirked. Elijah closed his eyes. No reaction. Not because he was weak, but because he had lived long enough to know that in rooms like this, stares say more than words ever will. Across the lobby, a teenage intern, black, maybe 19, entered wearing a crisp white shirt. When he spotted Elijah, he froze. Their eyes locked. No words exchanged. But something passed between them. I know. Me too. The intern broke eye contact and hustled into the elevator. Elijah watched him go, wondering how long the kid would last in a place where diversity was something printed on the brochure but never practiced in the mirror. The LED screen above the receptionist's desk flickered to a new slide. A faded photograph filled the screen. Two men, mid-handshake. One white, older, silver hair, George Ashton, Orion Tech's founder. Beside him, a black man in a gray suit. The image looked like it had been pulled from the early 90s. Elijah knew that face instantly. Even without a caption. Even without credit. Benjamin Carter. His grandfather. There was no plaque. No name. No mention of the man who helped write the company's mission statement. Technology is a tool. People are the solution. Elijah's mother once told him how Benjamin left the company in 1996, not because he was pushed out, but because he refused to compromise. While the board wanted profit, Benjamin wanted purpose. Tech to serve black communities, schools, and hospitals. And so they erased him like he never existed. Elijah sat up straighter. His fingers curled around the edge of the visitor badge. And in the silence of his thoughts, a voice rose like thunder beneath calm waters. Today, I don't need to be accepted. I just need to be seen. The elevator dinged. The doors opened. A man in a black blazer, holding an iPad, stepped out. He froze when he saw Elijah sitting there as if confused by his presence. Their eyes met. 3 seconds. But it was enough for Elijah to read him the way he scanned Elijah's hair, skin, posture, hoodie, the badge labeled visitor. He didn't need an introduction. Dylan Hirsch had just entered the story. The elevator doors closed behind Elijah, and the room seemed to freeze. Across the table, Dylan Hirsch, senior HR manager, entered with the slow confidence of a man who rarely needed to explain himself. Early 40s, white, salt and pepper hair, crisp white shirt, gray striped tie. The kind of person a system trains you to trust by default. No handshake. No greeting. Not even eye contact long enough to feel human. Elijah sat down at the unspoken gesture of a vague nod. Dylan glanced at the printed resume in front of him, voice flat. So tell me, do you often wear your hair like this? Elijah didn't flinch. He wasn't surprised, but the chill still crept down his spine. He offered a calm smile, his posture open, non-defensive. Yes, it's part of who I am. Hasn't been a problem at any of my previous jobs. Dylan nodded, eyes still on the paper. Right. Well, let's talk about your experience. What followed was a script. The standard polished set of questions handed out to HR managers since the dawn of LinkedIn. Tell me about a challenge you faced. What do you know about our company? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? But what was missing was interest. Real, human interest. Elijah answered anyway, clear and steady. He talked about ranking top 3 in a national hackathon, about building a distributed neural network for early wildfire detection. He explained how he'd optimized a blockchain logistics system for a consumer goods startup, reducing their order verification time from 36 hours to just 4. But as he spoke, Dylan's eyes barely lifted from his tablet, only occasionally flicking upward to glance not at Elijah's eyes but at his dreadlocks. Then Elijah mentioned his GitHub, over 800 stars on a back-end repo. And that's when Dylan interrupted with a faint, almost condescending smile. You're clearly bright. You've done a lot. Pause. But that single word dropped like a cold weight. Elijah exhaled through his nose, slow and steady. Orion Tech has a very specific professional image. You understand. The room seemed to compress, the air suddenly thicker. Elijah tilted his head slightly. Are you referring to my hairstyle? Dylan didn't blink. Just smiled again, the kind of smile that hides behind vague policies and HR-approved phrasing. Let's just say we're client-facing. Image matters. No rebuttal. No raised voice. But a slow heat spread through Elijah's chest, not the heat of anger, but the cold burn of being quietly dismissed. Again. He stood up. Thanks for your time. Dylan didn't stand. Didn't reach out to shake his hand. Just nodded. Another one. Quietly filtered out. Elijah walked the hallway in silence, pressing his tongue to the roof of his mouth to keep from letting the words spill. Then he stopped. His feet had carried him to a small glass-walled room off the stairwell, warm yellow lighting. A modest bronze plaque above the entrance. The Founders Gallery. He stepped inside. A single black and white photograph dominated the back wall. On the left, George Ashton, silver-haired, white, smiling with executive polish. On the right, a black man in a tailored gray suit, eyes calm, dignified, hand extended in a firm handshake. Benjamin Carter, Elijah's grandfather. But there was no name under the photo. Just a vague caption. Early visionaries during Orion Tech's founding, 1993. No Benjamin. No Carter. No legacy preserved. Elijah pulled out his phone, snapped a photo, tapped quickly. Mom, they still erased him. Message sent. His phone buzzed 1 second later. Incoming call, Mom. He stared at the screen, then declined. Not because he didn't want to hear her voice, but because right now, he couldn't hold the weight of both of their heartbreaks. Leaving the gallery, Elijah followed a sign that read Exit, a side door designated for guests. He pressed the button, and the glass doors opened to a hallway leading toward the parking lot. But behind him, a voice called out, "Sir, excuse me." He turned. A white security guard in a navy vest and Bluetooth earpiece was approaching, quick and firm. "That exit's not for visitors. You're not supposed to use that one." Elijah gestured to the sign behind him. "It says authorized personnel and guests. I'm a guest." The guard raised a brow. Didn't move. "Still, next time, use the front. That one's for corporate access." At that moment, a white man in a gray suit with silver hair pushed through the same exit door. No badge. No interruption. No problem. Elijah's eyes followed the man as he walked past, then turned back to the guard and looked him dead in the eye. "You always check people's exits by skin tone." No reply. The Seattle rain had returned, light but sharp. Elijah stood on the concrete steps outside, hands in his pockets, the wind slapping cold against his cheek. He didn't move. Didn't hurry off. He just turned slowly, looking back at the building behind him. The glass facade reflected his shape blurred. Small. Alone. Standing in front of the company his grandfather once helped build. Back in his small Capitol Hill apartment, Elijah didn't take off his shoes. He didn't change clothes. He sat down at his desk, opened his laptop, and began typing. New email. Subject. The Carter Legacy and What Your Company Forgot. Attachments. Full resume. GitHub portfolio. A cropped black and white photo from 1993. Benjamin Carter shaking hands with George Ashton pulled from archived press coverage. He began writing. To whom it may concern. Today I was denied an opportunity at Orion Tech for what was implied to be a lack of professional appearance. But what your company failed to recognize is that this unprofessional man is the direct descendant of the man who helped build the foundation you stand on. Elijah paused. His hands trembled slightly, not from rage, but from sorrow, because his grandfather had once dreamed of a generation that wouldn't have to knock, only walk in. He continued typing. My name is Elijah Carter. I am a software engineer. I am also the grandson of Benjamin Carter, the co-visionary behind your mission, Power Through People. But it seems that power doesn't recognize our hair, or our faces, or our names. I'm not asking for a second chance. I'm reminding you of the first one, the one your company erased. He hit send. On his screen, the faded image of Benjamin Carter stared back, mid-handshake, mid-smile. Just black and white pixels now. But Elijah swore he could almost hear him say, You did good, Eli. Elijah didn't sleep that night. After hitting send, The glow of the computer screen lost all meaning. He just sat there, motionless, eyes fixed on the blinking cursor like it was a forgotten heartbeat. In the silence, something settled. Not anger, liberation. As if, at long last, he had restored the name of a man who never should have been erased. A man who looked like him, who helped lay the foundation for an empire. But like so many others, history had done what it always does, kept the white parts and washed away the rest. The email Elijah sent wasn't long, but it hit like a stone dropped into still water, sharp, small, and disruptive enough to ripple through a system built to stay calm. Subject: The Carter Legacy and What Your Company Forgot. Dear Orion Tech Leadership, my name is Elijah Carter. I am a software engineer. I am also the grandson of Benjamin Carter, the co-visionary behind Orion Tech's founding mission, Power Through People. Today, I was denied an opportunity not because I lacked the skill or passion, but because I didn't look the part. I was judged not by my code, but by my hair. Not by my ability, but by your assumption. And what you didn't know was that I carry the legacy your company was built on. Legacy doesn't need a tie. It just needs to be remembered. Attached, you'll find my resume, project portfolio, and a photograph from 1993 Benjamin Carter, shaking hands with your founder, George Ashton. You erased a name. I'm simply writing it back. Sincerely, Elijah Carter. After sending it, Elijah shut his laptop. He expected nothing. No response. No apology. Because he hadn't written it to be accepted. He wrote it to remind them who gave them the right to exist in the first place. The clock ticked past 2:07 a.m. A cold breeze slipped in through the balcony. Elijah threw on a hoodie and stepped outside. In the distance, Orion Tech's tower glowed faintly through the Seattle mist, a distant beacon with its lights still on, but its conscience fast asleep. The executive floor buzzed with the usual calm, but that morning, an unexpected email shattered the rhythm. Subject line: The Carter Legacy and What Your Company Forgot. An operations coordinator forwarded it to CEO Marianne Keating. 3 minutes later, Marianne opened the message. Beneath it were over 30 internal forwards from employees across departments, some with one-line subject headers. We need to talk about this. Is this real? Was he really Benjamin Carter's grandson? And then, the photo. Black and white, slightly grainy, but unmistakable Benjamin Carter, calm and focused, hand locked in a firm shake with George Ashton. History stared back from the screen, and it was no longer silent. Meanwhile, on the 15th floor, a world away from boardrooms and branding, Jordan Ellis, a UX intern, scrolled through forwarded messages during a coffee break. He didn't know Elijah, but the name Carter struck something deep. Jordan opened X, formerly Twitter, fingers shaking slightly. He typed, "At Jordan Ellis UX. Today, a black software engineer with dreadlocks was turned away from Orion Tech, the very company his grandfather helped build. His name is Elijah Carter." And he just shook the system. Number: hair is not unprofessional. Number: legacy matters. 2 hours later, the tweet had over 50,000 retweets. 6 hours later, Elijah Carter topped Seattle's trending list. By noon, Forbes, Business Insider, Black Tech Pipeline, and Fast Company were publishing full-page features. The tech world was on fire, with one collective question. If you're not professional enough to honor your founder's name, how can you claim to fairly hire his people? Back in the 36th floor conference room, Marianne Keating sat at the head of the table. She had been with Orion Tech for nearly 20 years, from a 40-person startup to a corporate giant. And not once in that time had she heard the name Benjamin Carter. "Why wasn't I told this man had lineage?" she asked. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. Across the table, the director of HR wiped sweat from his temple. "There's no mention in the files. No red flags, but he didn't exactly look like a founder's bloodline?" Marianne cut in, her tone sharp but cold. The room fell silent. Elijah had no idea any of this was happening. He had turned off his phone, ignored emails. Now, he walked slowly around Green Lake, earbuds in, listening to old Coltrane tracks. He had done his part. He had said his truth. The rest? Now it was up to the system to decide if it would face itself or keep pretending it didn't see what was in the mirror. By evening, hashtags spread like wildfire. Number, hair is not unprofessional. Number, legacy matters. Number, code over cufflinks. Posts flooded in from all corners. A Stanford professor tweeted, "If Elijah Carter's dreadlocks bother you more than your bias, the problem isn't his hair." A black tech founder wrote, "The professional image you enforce is often just white comfort in a blazer." A college student shared, "His legacy was erased. Now he's just taken the pen back." That night, at exactly 8:43 p.m., Elijah stood in the kitchen making tea when his phone buzzed. Private number. He paused. Let it ring twice. Then answered. A woman's voice, low, composed, deliberate. "Is this Elijah Carter?" Speaking. "This is Marianne Keating, CEO of Orion Tech. I'd like to speak with you, personally. No PR team, no HR filters. Just you and me." Elijah stared out the window. Steam rose from the mug in his hand, now cooling fast. He waited a beat, then answered, calm and clear. "All right, let's talk." 9 a.m., Orion Tech's main entrance. This time, Elijah wasn't alone. As he approached the revolving glass doors of Orion Tech, he saw them standing just outside. Jordan Ellis, the young intern whose tweet lit the spark, stood with 3 other employees, all different shades of skin, all different walks of life. No one said a word, but their eyes met. And in that silent nod, solidarity, unspoken but undeniable. Elijah stepped past them with quiet composure. His dreadlocks were tied neatly, just like the first day. The only difference was today, he didn't need permission to exist. 36th floor, where bias once lived. Marianne Keating was already seated when Elijah entered. Early 60s, silver hair tied back, no jewelry, dark navy blazer. Minimal, measured, and deliberate. This time, she stood and offered her hand. And this time, there was eye contact. And a real handshake. "Thank you for coming. Figured it was time someone actually did," Elijah replied. No assistants, no HR presence. Just 2 people, one representing a system, and the other, a truth that system tried to erase. Marianne spoke first, her voice steady as a mountain. "We failed our mission. We turned a blind eye to the man who helped write it. And we rejected his grandson for looking like himself." Elijah was quiet. Then, calmly, he said, "I don't want your sympathy, Miss Keating. I want your system to recognize us without conditions. I want the next black kid with dreadlocks to walk into this building and not be a damn social experiment." No anger in his tone. Just exhaustion, the kind passed down through generations. Marianne leaned back in her chair and nodded. "Then that's what will change." The meeting lasted 45 minutes. No cameras, no PR spin, just truth and decisions. Dylan Hirsch, the HR manager who dismissed Elijah, was placed under internal review. All rejected applicants, especially from minority communities, would be re-examined. Hiring policies were overhauled. No more vague language around professional image. Natural hair, cultural dress, and identity expressions would be respected and protected. The DEI, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Board, was given decision-making authority, not just advisory roles. The Orion Tech Honor Hall would be redone. The black and white photo from 1993 would finally get its caption. Benjamin Carter, co-founder, visionary, advocate for equity. Elijah sat in still silence. Then he said, "I'm not asking for a statue. I'm asking you not to bury stories like his again." Marianne replied, "We won't. We'll make sure your grandfather and you are remembered not as footnotes, but as architects." That afternoon, Orion Tech held an all-staff town hall. A rare moment, no live stream, no brand slogans, just real talk. Marianne stepped onto the stage. Elijah sat in the front row, beside Jordan and the same employees who had stood by him at the door. She looked around the room. And then she said, "For too long, we've defined professionalism through a single lens, narrow, polished, and frankly biased. But today, we're reframing it. Professionalism isn't about your haircut. It isn't about your suit. If innovation can wear a hoodie, then it damn sure can wear dreadlocks too." The room stood in applause. Not for a buzzword, not for a feel-good line, but because finally a system stood up and owned its mistake, and then rewrote the script. As Elijah walked out of the auditorium, he glanced up at the Orion Tech Tower, the same one that once denied him a place at the table. Today, he was still himself. The same hair, the same skin, the same dream, but now there was one difference. He no longer had to prove he belonged here. Now, the building had to prove it was worthy of him. 1 month after the Turning Point meeting, the name Elijah Carter was no longer just a viral headline. He had become something more, a symbol. Not because he shouted or burned bridges, but because he made a system hold up a mirror and ask itself, who are we when skin, hair, and lineage are no longer the yardsticks for humanity? Orion Tech made it official. Elijah Carter was appointed technical advisor, leading AI projects centered around community empowerment and ethical applications. At the same time, CEO Marianne Keating extended a personal invitation. "We'd like you to be the face of our new DEI Talks initiative, not just as a name, but as a voice." DEI Talks, the largest nationwide series on diversity, equity, and inclusion in tech, would no longer be dominated by polished suits preaching from privilege. This time, the keynote speaker looked like the very people once told they didn't belong in the room. On the day of the final dress rehearsal, Elijah stepped out of the Orion Tech conference room, dreadlocks tied neatly, just like always. Gray hoodie, simple t-shirt, clean jeans and sneakers. Not a single thread screamed corporate, but every step he took declared something louder than fabric ever could. Professionalism isn't in the collar, it's in the courage. He didn't need a suit to be heard, didn't need a tie to be respected. He was no longer asking for space. He was the space. As he entered the main event floor, a small group of interns gathered by the check-in desk. Young, nervous, watching everything. One of them, a young black girl with tight cloud-like curls, looked up, eyes wide. She turned to her friend and whispered, "That's him. That's the guy. The guy who changed everything." Elijah heard it. He didn't turn around. Didn't need to. A small smile crept onto his face, the kind of smile that lives not in pride, but in quiet peace. The kind that says, "I endured enough to make this moment possible for someone else." That evening, Elijah stood alone on the rooftop terrace of Orion Tech's 36th floor, the same height where, not long ago, his existence had been questioned. Now, he looked out at Seattle, glowing like a constellation below. He pulled out his phone and reopened the photo. The updated Hall of Honor plaque. Benjamin Carter, co-founder, visionary, advocate for equity. Beside it, a small note in Marianne's handwriting. "History cannot be changed, but it can be corrected." Elijah nodded. There were no tears in his eyes, but the city lights reflected in them like stars caught in gravity. Tomorrow, he would walk onto the DEI Talks stage. But tonight, he was just a grandson. Grateful. Remembering. Proud of the legacy. Thankful the world finally listened. They no longer looked at him like an exception. They saw him a rightful part of the bigger picture. Because sometimes, you don't need to scream to change the system. You just have to stand still long enough for the world to finally look closer. If you've ever been judged for how you look, know that you're not alone. And if you're in a position to open a door for someone else, don't wait until they have to knock too loud just to be let in. Share this if you believe it's time to change the rules. And join us in telling meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons.